everyone could please be seated, we're ready to begin. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Shiawassee County Planning Commission special meeting tonight. Roll call.
Steve Andrews. Here. Walt Saxton.
Here.
Thomas Foster.
Present.
Robert Edmeyer.
Here.
Dan McMaster.
Here.
Bonnie Reno.
Here.
Bonnie Ott.
Here. Please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Proof of publication.
Madam Chair, we advertised in the March 11th, 18th, and 25th newspapers for the independent newspaper, both north and south zones. This is in addition to a normal planning commission due to the topic that's being discussed.
Thank you. At this time, we need to approve the agenda, but if you'll please look at the date on the top of the agenda, it states Wednesday, March 27th, and it should be Tuesday. So if we could make that correction, please, I'll entertain a motion.
So move.
Support.
It's been moved and supported that we change and approve the agenda as written. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Board of Commissioner comments. Mr. McMaster?
Well, Madam Chair, I have nothing to report at this time.
Thank you. At this time, I would like to ask, are there any Shiawassee County Commissioners in the audience? And if so, please stand. Shiawassee County Commissioners in the audience? Thank you. Okay, at this time, we are at the point in our agenda where we have a call to the public for comments. At this time, we will limit each speaker to 3 minutes, with the exception of a couple of people who are representing others. Mr. Nolan, I believe, is one, and industry representatives would be a couple of others. So I have sheets in front of me in the order pretty much in which they are received by me. So I will ask these people to please come to the microphone. There is a switch on the top of the microphone that you have to turn it on. It is battery operated, so we can't leave it on the whole entire time. But if we turn it on and off as needed, hopefully we can get through the evening. There's a green light when the microphone is on. So Matthew Shepard, I'd like you to please come on up.
Yes, I'm Matthew Shepard. I'm from Perry, Michigan, and I want to address my opposition to the windmill turbines, as I've gone through an extensive alternative energy management degree, and it's not feasible here in Michigan. We have a wind class of 2, which is variance of maybe 10 to 14 knots or miles per hour, somewhere in there. The wind turbines will not feasibly sustain themselves and put out enough energy here in the state of Michigan. Now, let's say out in the waters of Lake Michigan, you get up to class 6, great out there, but nobody wants them out there either. It's the voice of the people here. You gotta acknowledge the voice of the people. If you don't, why are you there? Why are you sitting in your seats? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Bob Collard.
Turn it off.
Don't decide.
Still on, right? Hello, my name is Bob Kellard. I'm from Woodhull Township, Michigan. and I'm here tonight to give a little bit of background on why I'm concerned living so far away. I grew up in this county, and I spent my career of over 25 years working with MDOT, evaluating the social, economic, and environmental impacts of major action projects, such as this one. And in a nutshell, this project is proposing to put upwards of 600 industrial wind turbines into 4 rural townships that have a residential density mix of about 17,000 people. And my instincts tell me, not only the data, but the instincts tell me that's a recipe for disaster. And it's happened. You're going to end up with about 15 to 20% of the people all over the world have been shown to be affected by the wind turbines. Just like the same number of people that get seasick. Some people won't be bothered by it, but that's 4,000 or 5,000 people. They'll get insomnia, they get headaches, dizziness, nausea. Their kids who were excelled in school suddenly start failing classes, fall asleep at school because they're away from the turbines. And because of those things, a lot of the people in this room came to all of your meetings and expressed those concerns. And back in December, it looked like you were coming up with something that addressed those concerns. And then suddenly, there's a letter on the internet from Tradewinds to Mr. Preston about the concerns that the wind industry can't operate under your current guidelines. And he gutted all of those recommendations were gutted practically, every one of them. So here we are, wondering who are you guys working for, this planning committee, Mr. Preston? Any fool here would say, is Shiawassee County throwing the money that they're paying Mr. Preston into the gutter? They might as well for what we get out of it. Anybody would question who he's working for. And with that comment, I'd like to say to the commissioners that if you can't come up with something that satisfies the people, I think it's time for the Board of Commissioners to fire Mr. Preston and his committee and hire somebody that can do what the people are asking for.
Thank you, Mr. Callard. I would recommend that we not suggest firing anybody at this point in time. Okay, the next person is Brina Caress. Did I get your name even close?
Sure.
Please state your name then.
It's Brina Gross, and I'm from the New Lothrop area. From 2007 to 2014, I lived in a small town called Glen Rock, Wyoming. 2009, the wind turbines came into our community, and I successfully ran a licensed daycare out of my home with the wind turbines a mile down the road. My daughter was an all-A student, didn't have any problems sleeping. We had no issues with dead animals on the road, dead birds, no headaches, no dizziness. I am definitely for the wind turbines. I feel that it will be a benefit. We saw a great increase for our little stores, our restaurants, when everybody came in to build them. It was amazing. I don't know, it was like the whole community just welcomed everybody that was coming. The workers, actually, people would open up their homes. They rented out rooms. I mean, everybody was able to make some money off them coming in, and it was just extremely helpful. But I had horses, like I said. I just never saw any issues with the wind turbines, and we actually got to tour them. The company took us on a bus. We went right up to them. I have pictures of my daughter standing under them. We never heard any noise. We never had any of these issues. So no one can ever take that away from me. I lived there from 2007 to 2014. 2009 and 2014 is when they were up there. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we have Teresa Bankow.
Hello, I'm Teresa Bankow. I'm in Owasso Township. And on June 28th of 2017, at the Planning and Zoning meeting, Pete Preston made this statement: "We will continue to listen to the public." Well, Mr. Preston, you haven't listened to us. You haven't listened to the citizens. You haven't listened to the 9 different townships that responded and said they all wanted tighter restrictions than what even you had at the previous ordinance that you had. You haven't listened to the sound expert, Mr. James. You haven't listened to reason or common sense. You've gutted the proposal. And I wonder who on this board agreed to such gutting. And since you're not an employee of the county, but a contracted employee, who are you really working for? You have a business, Preston Community Services in Clinton Township. And so I'd like to know, do you have connections with the wind companies? Is there a conflict of interest? Why was Commissioner Bruff also removed from the Planning and Zoning Board? He was the one commissioner that I knew had common sense on this board, and he asked intelligent questions. He also listened to the voice of the people. And why now is Commissioner McMasters put on this board? When he first was elected to commissioner, he recused himself of voting on any of the wind ordinances. Now all of a sudden he's on this board and he magically can vote. So I'd like to know how there's no conflict of interest. We also have asked each one of you members if you had leases, and you all said no. But we do know that there are some that have family members that hold lease. And I think this is a conflict of interest. State Representative Glenn Gary, he currently has introduced a bill that would prevent conflict of interest for local officials related to potential wind farm development. It would prohibit members of local government from voting on issues in which they or their families have direct financial interest. Failure to disqualify themselves from such a vote would be grounds for removal from office and result in criminal charges. So I sincerely hope that will pass, and maybe we won't have any conflict of interest. As Commissioner Bruff stated in a meeting that I attended, we should make our wind ordinance to protect our health, welfare, and safety of our citizens. If wind companies can come in and comply, then they would be welcome. If not, then they need to move on. And I don't think any of our suggestions are at all restrictive, and I'm kind of tired of hearing that. We are not making anything restrictive. Restrictive would be setting something that would be like 2-mile setbacks. And we haven't even suggested anything like that. We've been very reasonable and used common sense.
Time, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Tim Riegel. Tim Riegel, R-I-E-G-L-E.
Hi, my name is Tim Riegel. I'm a trustee for Fairfield Township, and I have been attending these meetings regularly, listening to what was said. I see a vast difference between what had been up there and what's up there now. I don't understand that. I'm not happy about it. I think that the ordinance that was written several months back, that was the proposed ordinance, was both fair and fairly reasonable. Apparently, there's a different opinion. It's a very sudden change. I wonder why. I'm not going to ask. It appears that this is something that the planning board has decided is what's going to happen. I'm not in favor of it.
Joe Donovan.
My name's Joe Donovan. I've signed a wind lease with the wind company. I think it would be a great economic benefit to all the townships and the county and everyone involved. And I just trust that you would, as a planning commission, set the ordinances that is good for everybody involved. Thank you.
Mary Eichholt.
Hi, my name is Mary Eichholt. I live in New Haven Township. I am on our township board. My husband and I own about 1,000 acres in 5 different townships in 2 different counties. We have not signed up for any wind leases. However, I am not opposed. I think with the shuttering of coal plants, we have to think about where our energy is going to come from. And if they're not going to come from wind, then we're going to be looking at solar. And in order to get the same number of megawatts that is proposed with a wind farm, you're going to take up a lot of valuable farmland to create a solar array. And obviously, nobody wants a nuclear plant in their backyard for that necessity. Using farmland for wind leases is considered an acceptable land use in the state of Michigan for agricultural land. It's in the state mandate. It's an acceptable use. It's accepted for property that is in PA 116, so that is not a conflict. I think that with a reasonable ordinance on the part of the Planning Commission, that we should be able to coexist, that there's a great benefit for our communities. On our little township board, we have a 2 mil road millage. We collect $90,000. That's it. We can barely pave 1 mile with that $90,000. That doesn't count trying to put down salt or brine or anything like that. There's just no money in our townships. This would greatly benefit our townships. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Chuck Weisenberger.
Hi, I'm Chuck Weisenberger. I'm from Chesaning Township. I too, like Joe Donovan, did sign a lease with Trade Energy. It's going to obviously help my farm, but I also have 2 daughters that are teachers in Chesaning School District, and I'm just looking at the tax base for my farm. It's going to help, but it's also going to help the community. I support it.
Nick Schlechter.
I'm not going to say nothing at this time.
Thank you. James Rabb.
I moved to this area to have a rural setting, not to have monstrous machines in my backyard. And your restrictions on the windmills are ridiculous. They need to be a lot more restrictive because they're encroaching on our lifestyle, our rural atmosphere, and what you're supposed to be doing to protect us is falling by the wayside. You're giving in to the wind energy companies because it's easier for you to say that the money they're bringing into the county is worth more than the taxes that we're paying on our properties. And if I got to give up my peace and tranquility. I don't have a lot. I got a few acres here and there, but it's my legacy to my kids. And you're gonna ruin it with these giant machines. And I don't want them.
All right, Joshua Nolan.
Good evening. I believe I gave a packet of information to each one of you. If I missed anyone, by all means, please let me know. When I was last here, I believe it was back in August, so it's been several months since I've had the pleasure of your company. And we had an ordinance that appeared to be going in the direction of being protective of your residents. It appears that on or about December 12th and 13th, 3 wind companies sent letters to Mr. Preston, and that all changed. When I reviewed the ordinance a few days ago, when I saw it for the first time, to say that I was surprised would be an understatement. The citizens have all been clamoring for more protection than what we had from, I believe it was the August version of your ordinance. The townships, unilaterally, have endorsed the changes that I suggested and requested greater protections. I read every one of the letters. But somehow, inexplicably, we went the complete opposite direction. That's very disconcerting that staff would recommend a weakening of an ordinance when the citizens, by and large, and the townships unilaterally have requested additional protections. With that, I'd like to go through the red line that I've created of Mr. Preston's red line and highlight some of the issues that I've uncovered as I went through this. On page 1 there, you'll see that there's a proposed change to the definitions. That's a pretty technical change that comes at the recommendation of an acoustician with 45 years of experience dealing with industrial noise control. And so for those, I would defer to his expertise on how to best define DBAs, DBCs, things of that nature. I also note that there was a change where it took away the county's right to have input into the selection of the acousticians who would do the sound testing for your area. And I have to say, I'm thoroughly confused by that. In my profession, we deal with expert witnesses very frequently. And you know, it's not uncommon to say that you can find an expert to say just about anything you want. You know, as I've quoted to you before, figures don't lie, but liars figure. And so it makes little sense to me to take away the county's input into who's going to be doing those sound testing, because why would you not want that? Why would you not want to make sure you're getting good, accurate, unbiased data as opposed to information from an acoustician who recognizes full well that if he would like continued employment by that wind energy company, he has to provide data and figures that will be supported by that wind energy company. The next question I would ask is, why on earth are we increasing to 50 dBA for a sound limit? We had last discussed 45, and frankly, my clients had pushed for 40 dBA, at least at night. And that's in accordance with the World Health Organization's recommendation for a 40 dBA nighttime noise limit. Because if you get beyond that, you start experiencing sleep disturbance. And when you start experiencing sleep disturbance, you start experiencing adverse health effects. And so I'm very confused by that. And I would also like to point out that in the study that was submitted to you by, and I'm not sure which of the wind companies submitted from RSG, but RSG's study shows that if you're above 45, you're going to have about 20% of your population that will be highly annoyed, and about another 20% that will be mildly annoyed. Why would you subject your citizens to that? It makes little sense. I'd also like to point out a very significant change of events that has occurred since I was last before you. Since we were last here, the U.S. Federal Court, Judge Ludington, Eastern District of Michigan, has issued a decision in the Tuscola Wind 3 versus Ulmer Township case, wherein the wind energy company filed suit claiming that the township improperly denied their special land use permit application. part of the arguments made by NextEra in that case was that a 45 L max sound limit was exclusionary, that it would preclude wind energy development and that it was therefore unlawful. And Judge Ludington resoundingly rejected that argument. He made it abundantly clear that 45 L max at the property line is a reasonable regulation under Michigan law, that the townships have the right to regulate in that manner, and that it was not exclusionary because the wind energy companies have the right to lease more ground, build smaller turbines, install fewer turbines. It's not exclusionary. He also questioned whether there was a demonstrated need for that type of land use because they already have electricity in that township. And lo and behold, as I look around tonight, it appears you guys do too. So I question whether there's a demonstrated need to even begin the concept or conversation about allegedly exclusionary zoning. But you can rest easy knowing that if you do decide to change it to a 45 dBA L-max sound limit at the property line, you've got federal case law to support you. So you're not going to be the tip of the spear. I would also point out, as I have in my red line, that you should include a DBC noise limit. That deals with the infrasound, the low frequency sound. Those are longer sound waves. They have greater penetration through walls. They travel for much farther distances. The low frequency noise or infrasound, as people frequently interchange the two terms, they're not quite the same, but people frequently interchange those two terms. Those are your sources of annoyance. That's that bass speaker from the teenager that you feel before you hear it. You have nothing to regulate that. And as you'll see from the document that I submitted from Mr. James, that is a potentially significant gap in the protections that Shiawassee County residents deserve. There's also another minor change in there that was introduced by staff about where you measure it, and he just says at any property line. And I don't think there's a nefarious purpose behind that change, but as I've explained before, experts will play games. And so if it says any property line, they're not gonna measure from the nearest property line. They're gonna go to the one on the far side of that parcel and submit that. And so, you know, that's a change that seems innocuous, but could have very detrimental results to the residents of your county. The next issue I'd like to discuss with you are setbacks. Again, as I read through, the vast majority of citizens and every one of the townships have requested either setbacks that we had before of 300% or greater. Now, I'd like to point out to you that Riga Township, down in Lenawee County, southeastern Michigan, has a 400% of height setback. And there were 3 wind companies there that threatened litigation if they enacted that. I can tell you as I sit here now, 7 years later, that litigation never commenced. It never happened because it's very reasonable. That type of setback is eminently reasonable. Previously, the staff and the prior version was 300%. That's a little better than what's being currently proposed, but it's still insufficient. Staff is now proposing a 200% of height setback. So that's for a 500-foot turbine, which is apparently the height limit that's being suggested now. For those that don't have a house that's set far back off their property line, they could well have a turbine within 1,100 feet, or a little under. I've given you documentation of incidences of ice throw and blade debris throw well in excess of 1,000 feet. And in fact, there's a recent study out of Denmark that says that you can expect ice throw in excess of 700 meters, so that's going to be in excess of 2,000 feet. And you can expect blade debris from 700 meters up to 2 kilometers. And so, faced with that information, to force someone to live 1,100 feet away from a turbine is borderline criminal. When you add in the fact that documentation I've given you previously from Vestas and Nordex includes a requirement that they retreat up 500 meters upwind in the event of an overspeed event, which is 1,640 feet or approximately there so, you're now going to have families in their homes that are 1,100 feet away. How are they supposed to pick up their home and make it retreat? You're forcing them to live in the danger zone. Again, that section also had a change about where to measure from any property line versus closest property line or nearest property line, and we've discussed that already. There's also a change in there that I would recommend to have a bit of a safety factor for the setback from the roads. Right now, it's 100%. And so if a turbine falls, it may well have debris and stuff flying onto the road because it's just 100% of the height of the turbine to the road. As we just saw with the bridge collapse in Miami, you can have absolutely tragic and unforeseen events that can lead to the death of people who are just innocently driving along the road. Why even create such a scenario in your county when you have it within your authority to at least make it 125% or 150%? Create a little bit of a fudge factor there, a little bit of a safety factor, so that people don't have to worry as they drive down the road whether or not that 500-foot tall structure is going to fall on them. Shadow flicker, that's the next thing on the list. When we were last here, there was a recommendation of 0 hours a year of shadow flicker on non-participating parcels. That's now been changed to 24 hours a year. That's a new one by me, I'll tell you. I've been involved in more than a dozen of these. I've not seen a 24-hour requirement before. I've seen 30. 24 is new. But it might as well be unlimited. Because what you've done with a 24-hour shadow flicker limit is basically created an enforcement nightmare. You're going to force your residents to stand outside with a video camera and a stopwatch and a logbook to document how much shadow flicker they're getting. These are people who aren't benefiting from this project. They're not getting paid for this. If it's 0 shadow flicker, it's real simple to enforce. You go out to the property, you see shadow flicker, they're in violation. On top of that, as I explained to you before, technology is available to assist us with this type of problem. There are shadow detection systems that will shut down the turbine when it is casting shadows where it's not permitted to do so, and restart it when the sun moves to a new position. So if we've got technology that's available to help us avoid this problem, help you guys avoid the enforcement nightmare that you'll be dealing with, reviewing videos of shadow flicker and logbooks and stopwatches, I would strongly encourage you to take advantage of that. Your residents right now have 0 hours of shadow flicker a year, and I see no reason that that's a change. Your decommissioning, there's a few changes in there that are made that I'm confused by because it takes away some of the authority of the county. For example, you've taken away the authority of the county to have input into which engineer is going to be doing the documents to determine how much decommissioning will cost. Again, why? Why wouldn't you want input into that? They've also made a very significant change in the surety bond process to go from an annual review of the sufficiency of that surety bond to now a 5-year review. That's a long time. A lot can change in 5 years. But what's even more disconcerting is that there's now a cap on how much you can raise it. Again, why? You have no idea what's going to change in the world that could cause those decommissioning costs to skyrocket, or they may drop like a rock and then you can decide to reduce the surety bond that's being held. But why take away the county's input into those things? Why take away that authority that's been given to you to protect your residents? Signal interference is the next issue, and this was actually raised by me at your last meeting because the language that's proposed only requires them to identify signal interference. That's it. All they have to do is tell you, yeah, these people in this area, they're not going to get radio and TV anymore, sorry. There's no requirement to fix it. What good does that do? It's great to know that it's going to happen, I guess, but if you have no remedy for it. So I've suggested language in there that would require that if there is signal interference from radio, TV, microwave, whatever it may be, that it must be fixed. It must be remedied to the satisfaction of the person whose signal is being degraded. Moving on, liability insurance is the next issue that is in my red line. And for some reason, staff has taken away the ability of the county to identify how much liability insurance a wind company would need to have to build one of these projects. You have no ability now to ensure that there's sufficient insurance to protect your residents in the event of some catastrophic failure. I don't understand why. I don't see how that benefits the county in any way, shape, or form. And it certainly doesn't benefit your residents. Last on my list would be lighting. Right now, the ordinance is pretty silent on that, just says it has to be lighted in accordance with whatever federal regulations may be applicable. and the FAA is going to require blinking red lights on structures of that height. However, as I mentioned to you before, there is a radar-activated on-demand lighting system that is being employed elsewhere. NextEra is using it in North Dakota right now. They have promised to use it on a proposed project in Tuscola County if they're successful in building that as well. It's already been approved by the FAA. That would help reduce the visual light pollution and make sure that your county does not become one giant red light district all night, every night, as I've seen in other locations that I've been. That would only cause those red lights to come on when there's a plane in the area that would require those types of protections. And again, take advantage of the technology that's available to you. My understanding that adds maybe 1% of the project cost to the project. So if the wind developer who's going to profit from the project can give up 1% of their profits so that your residents aren't living in a giant blinking red light district all the time, I think that's something that you should take advantage of.
Madam Chair, that is 15 minutes.
I have just one final comment.
That's fine, Mr. Nolan, go ahead.
Every single township that I read their letters from requested greater protections. Okay? Mr. Preston and I had a previous engagement in Clinton County where similar issues were occurring. And when the county continued forward with less than protective regulations for wind energy, multiple townships decided to take back their own zoning and take care of these problems for themselves. And I suspect very strongly that if this planning commission and the county commissioners approve the ordinance that staff has recommended as we sit here, you'll see a similar exodus of townships here in Shiawassee County. Thank you.
Peter Sinclair.
Hello, and thanks for inviting me. I am from Midland, and I've been studying wind energy for a long time. We've been building out wind energy in the United States now for a couple of decades, and the one thing that we've learned, it is now the cheapest source of electricity out there, and it is getting cheaper. Department of Energy shows us that the costs have been steadily coming down, and just as you would expect in a free market, we've been buying more and more of it. If we look at the comparative costs of energy from several different sources, you see that wind is in fact the most competitive right now. Gas is very close by, and solar is coming up fast on the outside. Coal and nuclear are starting to price themselves out of the market. Popular Mechanics tells us that building new wind farm costs less than running old coal plants and nuclear plants, with some of the new technology coming in with some really astounding gains in recent years. Cedar Rapids Gazette in Iowa. Iowa, of course, is the state with the largest penetration of wind power, more than 30% of their electricity. The Gazette reports that when adjusted for inflation, Iowans are spending about 1/2 cent less per kilowatt hour than they were 20 years ago, and meanwhile, nationally, the cost has increased by about the same. Des Moines Register reports pretty much the same thing. Costs are going down. And in that regard, because costs are so favorable in Iowa, big companies like Apple, Facebook, Microsoft, and Google are flocking to the state for what they call a world-class power grid, according to Apple CEO Tim Cook. And many of these companies, Google and Facebook among them, are asking that their data centers run completely on renewable energy, which is something that Iowa can do. And so they're attracting cutting-edge economic development, which is something we're starting to get here in Michigan too. Switch is a large data center recently opened in Grand Rapids. When they were looking to locate in Michigan, the first question they asked was, can you get us power? And the second question, can you get us 100% renewable? And because we had robust wind development in Michigan, the answer was yes. More and more Fortune 100 companies have now set climate or clean energy targets. So what we have here is a $5 billion investment and 1,000 jobs, 1,000 good jobs that would have gone somewhere else except for the robust wind development that we've had here in Michigan. Dow Chemical, big company up where I live, has been buying huge wind. In fact, the largest corporate purchase of wind at the time, in 2015, the company will be powering completely its Freeport, Texas manufacturing site with wind. It's the largest chemical complex of its kind in the Western Hemisphere. In Texas, we're seeing so much wind come online that electricity prices are actually going negative on a regular basis there. And big utilities like TXU in San Antonio are offering a nighttime special of free electricity. Save the dishes until after 9 o'clock and the electricity's on them because there's so much coming in. Now, that won't last because better transmission will bring that electricity out to other markets. But for now, Texans are benefiting immensely, as are people in other countries like Germany and Denmark. California is going to reach its 50% renewable power goal by 2020, 10 years early, 10 years sooner than they thought. These are our competitors. California, Germany, Denmark, Texas. These are our industrial competitors, and they're going to be running their economy on fuel that is free and cost that never goes up. We need to think about that. I've lived in Michigan all my life, and I love it here. But I want to be able to compete. At the same time, we see that the big gas turbine fossil fuel manufacturers are starting to cut jobs because they can no longer compete with renewable energy, including wind and solar. So Siemens, big German company, is under so much pressure from renewable power generation that they're having to cut up to 7,000 jobs. Same thing with General Electric. General Electric thought they had their gas turbine division all set for the next several decades just a few years ago, but what's happening now is they are encountering difficulties because of the unforeseen impact of the clean energy revolution. And they are shipping a lot of megawatts worth of wind turbines, but still facing pressure to lower prices because the technology is improving so rapidly. And that's the way the free market works. Now, with all this news about renewable energy, it's hard to understand why so many people still think that renewable energy is marginal or not a major player. But there's a very well-financed and well-organized pushback, and I would say misinformation campaign about renewable energy. It is organized by the fossil fuel industry. And we have a major player in that pushback right here in Michigan. His name is Kevin Martis. Some of you have seen him present. I can't go through everything that he talks about, but I do want to take a look at this one particular slide, which caught my eye when I saw him present not long ago. I knew I had seen this graph before, and I know it looks like a bunch of bubbles, but we'll discuss. And I had to go through a lot of searching before I found the actual source of this graph. But finally I did. It is the Wind Technologies Market Report from the Department of Energy, which is a gold standard in terms of information. It is an excellent source of information. And so that is excellent because so often in America these days we come to the table without bringing a common set of facts. But this is a common set of facts that we can all look at. Remember, Ronald Reagan said everyone's entitled to their own opinions, but nobody's entitled to their own facts. So let's take a look at what is in this graph. This is the original graph in the report that Mr. Martis lifted. There's his version. That's the original. Let's go back. There's his version. That's the original, his version. That's the original. So as you can see, he's digitally altered the original image. He's photoshopped it for reasons you'll have to ask him. But one reason that probably stands right out is he didn't like this headline: wind power purchase agreement prices remain very low, especially in the interior region. He decided that did not fit his narrative, so he photoshopped it out. And he presents that around the state and around the country. Just to walk through this, graph here, all these soap bubbles, each bubble is a wind project. Big bubbles are big projects, small bubbles are small projects, and they are color-coded. So that, for instance, projects in the so-called interior, meaning the Great Plains, are purple. And if we look at a little further down, we see that projects located in the Great Lakes are orange. Now you can see the purple, they're really easy to pick out, and you can see what a great success that has been across the Great Plains. The price of wind energy is very, very low, and that's a huge success. The orange circles are a little bit harder to pick out here. Let's see, there we go. Here they are, some of them. So you can see that the Great Plains is a little bit cheaper than our Great Lakes area, but of course they've got a lot further to go before they can deliver energy to an actual population center. So that is a consideration. But Mr. Mardos doesn't want you to look at the orange circles. For some reason, he wants you to look at this big red line that he's drawn here. Not quite sure what that's all about. But when I look at this graph, what I see is a whole lot of wind energy, and so my question is, compared to what? This is all wind energy. What would it be compared to, say, the average purchase price of electricity across the United States of America over the last decade or so, which is right there, just above $100 a megawatt hour. And when you look at it in that perspective, what you see is wind energy, by and far, has been well below the average cost that Americans are paying for electricity. This is simply the historical fact, and it puts the whole thing into a different perspective. And if we add in, remember what we know about the relative costs of the various forms of energy, we can paint in wind there. We can paint in gas, and we see that wind and gas are very much competitive. Nuclear, quite a bit higher. Coal, higher still. And there's your average. So the fight right now is between wind and gas turbines. So the question would be, why would a company like Dow or General Motors or Facebook choose wind energy? And there's a number of reasons for that. In fact, just a few pages after the graph that Mr. Martis chose to alter, there's another graph. And this one has an interesting title too. It says, recent wind prices are hard to beat, competitive for the expected future with burning fuel and natural gas plants. So here's the expected price of wind up and through 2050. And you can see that there's a range there, but basically the average continues to go down, and some of the most favorable projections show it going down by half in the next couple of decades, which makes sense because learning curves are real, mass production works. But if we look at, for instance, gas, which is the main competitor, we see that gas is going up. The dark blue line is the average, but this big range here is the unknown. We know that gas has perennially been very volatile. The price bounces all over. And companies that buy power don't like prices that bounce all over. They like prices that are predictable. And that's why a company like Dow, a company like General Motors or Amazon is buying wind energy, because they can buy long-term contracts, 10 years and longer, and they can know what their costs are going to be a decade or more in advance. Accountants, bean counters, really love that kind of predictability. So wind has a tremendous advantage. I would also say, very important to note, the subsidy, which a lot of people talk about, is going away. It will be phased out over the next couple of years and it'll be gone by 2020. So the companies like Dow and General Motors and Switch have bought long-term contracts knowing that the subsidy is going to go away because they so value the predictability and stability of wind energy over the other competitors. Now, a lot of people ask, what happens when the wind stops? Well, it's important to note that not just wind and solar, but all forms of energy are intermittent. That includes coal, nuclear. In fact, just a few months ago, we had a giant nuclear plant in Massachusetts that shut down suddenly in the midst of the giant winter storm that was occurring, the bomb cyclone, as you may remember. The nuclear plant shut down completely in a microsecond, but the lights did not go out because engineers, of course, have prepared for these kind of events for 100 years, and they're good at it, and they've got it figured out. So very much like any other source of energy, you have to provide for when there is variability in the power that you're getting. The average coal plant shuts down 44 days a year. A nuclear plant will shut down 36 days a year and has to be refueled every 17 months, which is a 6-week process. And remember, wind turbines, say in 100 or so wind turbines, 1 to 2 of them might be down at any one time. And it is important to know that a coal plant or a nuclear plant can shut down in microseconds, which is a very difficult problem for engineers to deal with. Whereas wind turbine, wind goes up and down predictably, and engineers looking into 24 or even 48 hours into the future can have a very good idea of what the wind is going to be so they can plan for it. And they do so very effectively. And that's why grids like Germany's with major penetration of wind and solar are up to 10 times as stable as American grids. And that's what companies are looking for.
Madam Chair, that's 15 minutes.
Very good.
Okay. Can you wrap that up, Mr. Sinclair?
I think so. I think I'm good. I have more to say, but I can leave it right there.
Thank you. Brad Nozick.
Good evening. I just want to clarify kind of before my time starts. Is it just me speaking here for how long do I have, or is it?
The gentleman represents Trade One. They filled out slips for each of their employees. We've given others that represented a group 15 minutes total.
Okay. So we'll split our time, and I'll have some kind of folks that kind of come and share my time here as well. So I just want to get that clarified. Thank you for having me, here tonight. There's been a lot of information kind of out there. I know you guys have been discussing this for some time. There's been a lot of information presented, and I think kind of what you're hearing even tonight, talking from both people that represent, a pro-wind side or an anti-wind side, it comes down to a point of reference, and I think that's where kind of the discussion is being made. Folks that are approaching this from an anti-wind perspective, their point of reference is very much different from where I would stand, in the industry of producing wind generation facilities. There's a couple points, and they'll bring up lots and lots of points. I mean, hundreds. It's a death by 1,000 cuts kind of the approach that they take to try to hammer down these three things. And I want to kind of simplify this and come down to a couple big topics to kind of show you that when some of these anti-wind kind of folks are talking about their numbers, they know that getting certain numbers, although it may not be exclusionary zoning, but they will put this into where it's nearly infeasible either to physically lay out a project or just the economics they know will kill the project. But a lot of these things that they're talking about can be mitigated and they can be addressed. And that can come through on our application and then through an operations protocol going forward. So a couple of things I just kind of want to talk to you about tonight are the shadow flicker, noise, sound, whatever you want to describe it as, setbacks, and then kind of the charge that some of your constituents have said about health, safety, and welfare. I'll leave, sound and the health, safety, and welfare parts to some of my other constituents here to kind of talk. But on setbacks and kind of where these things are. Setbacks, we've heard all the horror stories of blade throw and ice throw and kind of all these things out there. I'm not going to deny or say that those things didn't happen. But what they do happen is in a very rare frequency. And some of those other things that we're thinking about as we're zoning, we're not zoning for the abnormal conditions. We're zoning for how things operate under a normal condition. And so with that, setbacks of 200% from a non-participating property line, right? What you're zoning there for is if something were to fall over, where is it going to fall, right? And to the point even Mr. Nolan said, yeah, you want to leave a little bit of buffer there. I agree. I think that buffer, though, my point of reference would be that's 150%. These things aren't going to magically jump up and fall over kind of thing. Now, again, coming to the frequency of these failures, over the tens of thousands of operating hours across the country, incidents that they're brought up that garner headline stuff are very small. But again, the same point, are we zoning other things in our communities for those abnormal conditions? What happens if a propane tank is to explode? Is that, within 30 feet of your house, do we have to keep our propane tanks farther away for the incidents that one time out of thousands of operating hours that were to happen? Again, this is the difference in the point of reference. I'm not arguing that these things are not to be considered at that point of reference. Same thing for houses and cars coming down the road. If you probably polled folks in your community, how many times have they had a car end up in a ditch outside their house or on their front lawn? Things like that do happen, but you don't zone for that to not happen. You don't zone for the abnormal condition that it goes away. And with that, I'd like to kind of bring up some of the other folks in my group here to kind of talk.
Good evening. My name is Mike Hankard. I'm an acoustical consultant. I was asked to come here by Tradewinds tonight. I have about 28 years experience. I've measured wind turbines, predicted wind turbines. I've slept in people's homes that have complained about wind turbine noise. I have a good deal of experience here. The first thing I want to talk to you about is the metric that you have in your ordinance. You keep going to this L-max, and I would strongly argue against that. It's a nightmare when it comes measurement time. Birds chirping create L-max levels above your limit. Wind gusts would create L-max levels. The American National Standards Institute, ANSI S12.9 Part 3 defines a metric called the LEQ, and that's what most states and counties use, and I would advise that. A lot of this is laid out in my December 11th, 2017 letter to Tradewinds that I think was forwarded to you. So, in terms of the limit itself, I like your original on the books ordinance of 45 at the residence and 55 at a property line. I think that's an excellent selection. It's a balance. A majority of the wind turbine projects in this country were permitted at 50 dBA. You'd be at the house. You'd be at 40 with a little added protection at the property line if you so choose. That would be my recommendation. I do have some other standards that I would suggest you put in your ordinance, just some of the definitions that are in there now that apparently are from another consultant are just confusing to me. And there's standards on the books that lay all this out, so why would you bother to redefine things that have already been given a good deal of thought by professionals? I would also urge you to add some specifics in there about modeling. Like how does a wind company come to you and prove that they're going to meet your limits beforehand? You might want them to submit a protocol, for example. That's common. Same with measurements. These measurements can get tied up in legal proceedings for years if there's not some clear definition of what we're measuring, how many data points are valid, etc. It's nice to have that spelled out to avoid trouble down the road. I heard tonight the low frequency noise and infrasound, and I'll let Dr. Ellenbogen speak to the health implications of that. But in terms of levels, you have to understand that all sources put out infrasound. Wind puts out infrasound. You get infrasound driving in a car and riding in an airplane at levels far greater than you'll ever get from a wind turbine. The infrasound levels from wind turbine have been documented across the world at being orders of magnitude below what humans can hear. And then finally, the 45 limit that I'm urging you consider, that would be for the loudest time. So that would be when all the turbines are operating, the atmosphere is conducive to sound propagating. You know, there's some of those nights when you hear the highway or the distant whatever, and some you don't. We would want to account for the ones when it's good propagating conditions and all the turbines are on. That's called the loudest hour. That's what we refer to it in the industry. The 40 decibels recommended by the World Health Organization is an annual average. That is extremely clear, and it's extremely important to keep in mind. And there's about a 5 to 8 dB difference between what you get from the loudest hour to what you get for the annual average. So if you regulate the loudest hour at 45, you're going to be below the World Health Organization standard on an annual average basis. So that is all the comments I have. I'm happy to answer questions later or provide information in writing if that pleases the board. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Jeff Ellenbogen. I was invited here by Tradewinds to listen and provide insider comment or answer questions pertinent to the potential health effects of wind turbines. I'll speak briefly in general and happy to take questions, and just a little bit of background about myself. I'm a board-certified neurologist. I'm also a board-certified sleep specialist. My research is in the interface of sound and brain physiology, including in sleep. I was the director of sleep medicine at Harvard's Mass General Hospital for 6 years. I was a sleep doctor and neurologist at Johns Hopkins for 4.5 years. I'm now the director of the Sound Sleep Project. As a side, I'm a volunteer firefighter, and I only mention that in this context as my commitment to health and well-being, I hope you'll find somewhat credible. Pertinent to this topic, back in 2011 and 12, I was approached by the Department of Public Health and in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, where I was living, working at Harvard. And they said, we have lots of wind turbines that are being developed in the Commonwealth, and we really could use some perspective on it. We have people that are for, people that are against, people that are worried, people that need information. And so they asked me, along with a 7-member committee, to take the lead in terms of looking at the existing literature, whether there are health effects, taking public comments and reviewing them in great detail, and even when there aren't those, just exploring biological plausibility, which they meant just simply leave no stone unturned. Look for things that even people aren't complaining about. Let us know if you see or hear of a problem of concern, because we're going to be developing these. And so that's exactly what we did. For a year we met, we reviewed literature, we took public comments, we went to great lengths to try to understand the issue, and put together a report that's published in 2012 about that very thing. And before I get to some of the findings of that, let me just mention also a little bit about my own personal experience or professional experience with this issue. I also had the opportunity to go to the state of Michigan, where I've lived in the past. I went to U of M, and interview, examine, and review the medical records of people who had themselves raised concern that they were suffering from medical problems as a result of the wind turbines. So I think I've got a fair bit of experience with this, and so I think I'd like to share basically the following sort of big picture. There is no question that one can be annoyed by wind turbines. There will be a group of people who don't like them, who find them annoying, who find them disruptive. Let me come back to that for just a moment and just put a pause and a pin in that to say the following, that the Massachusetts Commission, which was led by me, and since then I followed the literature in great detail. There is no such thing as wind turbine syndrome. These are not emission beasts that will cause human health and disease problems, particularly at the level that you guys are talking about, which is fairly quiet and fairly conservative. And so I'm not worried about the health impact. Now, the community may not like wind turbines. They may find them downright annoying. They may decide that it's not for them. And that's really something I admire and respect. What I worry about is that it's put in the context of health effects, that the word protections imply that protections from dizziness, insomnia, headaches, failing at school, and so forth. And when I hear these things, even earlier today, I think Mr. Nolan mentioned death, although that death was, in the context, I think he was referring to an example of a bridge that had collapsed. But I think when we talk about death and we talk about danger zones and we describe things on the wall as I walked in here that says wind turbines ruin lives. And when I hear those things, I'm reminded that the greatest cause of insomnia is anxiety. And when someone has even a briefest of disruption of sleep, which happens to all of us, even in the healthiest circumstances, we normally fall right back asleep. But if I wake up and I'm worried that this wind turbine is going to collapse on my house and cause death or mayhem or destruction, it's going to be a lot harder to fall back asleep. I don't think that that's an example of wind turbines causing insomnia. And I think that that's an important distinction that I want to make clear. Now, there will be people who battery's cutting out on me as the time is cutting out on me, so maybe I should just cut it short. But I think I've made my big picture measures, and I will stay around here, and if need be, even tomorrow to answer questions. I think there are lots of people, despite the loudness of the voices and some of the hyperbole, I think there are people that have very genuine and very reasonable questions and concerns, and I'd love to be able to have the opportunity to talk with them as a group or as individuals to address them. Thank you.
Is that the end of the 15 minutes for us?
2 minutes and 40 seconds.
Okay, so with that, I will just kind of take just a little bit of time here, because I noticed I did kind of skip over kind of the issue of flicker there. And I know you're absolutely right, and Dr. Ellenbogen was kind of talking about annoyance. And one of the things with, shadow flicker is the annoyance, the strobe effect of that light caused from the shadow there. But what is manageable and you're able to mitigate against that is, it is a giant geometry problem. You have a light source that crosses the sun. You know what the structures are. They're not changing their geometry. So each day and each hour of each year, you know where those shadows will be. And as part of our mitigation strategy, our flicker study will show you kind of where those shadows will be. And it takes into account days where it's cloudy and that sunlight source isn't coming through and there aren't shadows there. It's all kind of taken into account for. But again, it's that point of reference that we're talking about. And where that is, where that shadow flicker is occurring. Is it on where people are residing? Absolutely, there needs to be thought put into where that's going to be. Now again, you'll hear the argument of trespass nuisance, and I don't want a shadow coming on my property because that's my property and you're trespassing on it. But if you're talking an area where there are no people that are habitating 99% of the time, maybe a corner of a cornfield or a bean field, is that something where a trespass nuisance for a shadow, is that something there? Do we need to say nothing ever on that pine? Now again, people will say, hey, maybe I'm going to put something there in the future. Well again, that's part of this shadow flicker and the mitigation. If there's concerns for where those shadows are going to be, they can be addressed. And that's all I'm saying. That's the difference here. And again, it's a point of reference of where we're talking about. Thank you.
We can. I might grab that microphone from you, Matt. If you can hand it to me just in case. So that
Public comment done? I got one more slip in. Oh, one more slip. You get him.
I can speak up. I'll wheel around this way so I can face it.
All right, Mike Coyne.
I graduated from Ovid LC, and within weeks of that graduation, I was off to the Marine Corps. very proud moment in my life, thinking that I was going to protect the constitutional republic and to support other noble things like every vote counts. About 3 months ago, I was talking with a farmer from Shiawassee County. Surprisingly enough, he wasn't a big fan of wind energy. We had a somewhat lengthy conversation, but he eventually said something that caught me off guard. He said that farmers should have more say-so in these decisions because they own more land. Now, granted, I think that's a one-off case, but what it did is that evening, I had to tell him, I said, I disagree 100%. None of us should get more or less than one vote. No matter how rich or poor, one vote. That evening it was clear to me that we have a constitutional republic on life support. The actions of our County Planning Commission reflect this. We no longer have a system where every vote counts. The new system is based on wealth, where only the corporate dollar counts. It's a crisis at all levels of government, regardless of party affiliation. My statement to you, it better stop right here, right now.
Jean Roos.
Gene Roos, Middlebury Township, Shiawassee County. So we're all here to listen. We got the wind. We got our group that's fighting it. So all I've heard tonight, everybody talking about this, is one person that lived in a wind zone. Mrs. Gross stated she lived a mile away. Didn't bother her. Well, great. Let's solve this all right now. Put them a mile away from everything. Problem solved.
Okay, at this point, we'll defer to Pete.
Okay, we'll give this a shot. Let's make sure everyone can hear me. If the battery cuts out, I'll grab from the other. First of all, thank you again for coming to our meetings and providing input. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to review staff's additional recommendations. When we provided these additional recommendations, that was following review by the townships as submitted based on the Planning Commission's last discussion. At that meeting, we also talked that this is a document that'll keep going through. At that time, we also did not have what we would consider substantial input from those parties, wind turbine companies and such, that were interested in leasing and developing land. So we also received that. Now, the Planning Commission has many times in the past developed with the assistance of staff regulations for land uses, whether they be wedding barn venues, surface mining, and the like. Many times the Planning Commission has modified, rejected, or accepted staff's recommendation. Those times you ask me to pull together as much information as we can that's feasible for our office and come back to you with that. But this Planning Commission is the recommending body, and they do recommend ultimately to the Board of Commissioners. And this Planning Commission does its due diligence, taking information from all sources, reviewing that information as well as staff's. So that's where we are at in this process. We sent the information out to the townships. The three companies, DTE, Apex, and Tradewinds, did provide comment back. That information was made available to the public as well. When we went through, yes?
Have all the townships responded?
No.
How many within the wind area?
I'm not sure. Matt, do we have a rough number, or Mike? We have the majority of the townships, and I do believe all townships. I really don't have an affected area. I have from previous meetings where they said that the northwest quarter, including Owasso Township, and then we understand in the northeast quarter of the county that leases are also being looked at and signed by whichever company at that time.
But there were 14 townships that were supposed to be doing it, correct? 13?
Yeah, it'd be 14.
14.
And we have documentation from 6.
No, I'm sorry, what's that?
We have documentations from 6.
From 6.
I do believe we might have more. This was, as we get them in, it was 9. Okay, we received 9 out of the 14. When we developed this language, and when I say we, this was just the assistance of Mike and Matt to gather the data. As you know, we did look at other communities and what they adopted. Most recently, Isabella County has been also amending their language and their ordinance, so we also took a look at what they were doing. As far as our guiding principles, just to give you an idea as we develop this language, the first guiding principle, and not in any particular order here, but one of the guiding principles is that wind energy is deemed a legitimate land use, and that being said must be reasonably accommodated and not regulated so far as to prohibit the use. And as Mr. Nolan talked about, that is usually determined by the courts and judges and litigation. The second item, in establishing these regulations, we also recognize the rights of property owners to sell, lease, or use their property. So it's not just the wind turbine companies. There are individuals that have essentially sold the rights to their property for a particular use. The third item, we also recognize that property owners in vicinity of a use should not be unreasonably burdened in the personal use and enjoyment of their property. And I think that's the concern of the majority of the folks that you've heard tonight, is that they feel that this particular use is going to impact the use and enjoyment of their property. So we tried to, taking all those guiding principles into effect, take into account the multiple interests here, and multiple experts, and give you essentially guidance as to what we think is that balancing act. The Planning Commission at any time can take any part of this regulation and change it, can modify it. And so the purpose of tonight's meeting is I would really like to make sure that we tackle 3 main issues, and that's sound, height, and setback. Once we get through this meeting, I would hope the Planning Commission would be able to, in the very near future, schedule a public hearing so that we can move this up to the ladder to the Board of Commissioners. In order to do that, though, we need to get through those steps. I'm not asking for the Planning Commission to vote on this overall ordinance, but I would like to tackle these 3 issues and see where the Planning Commission is at. You can take a consensus vote on that. If you think 45 is the right number, if you think 50 is that the right number, and then give us a little guidance as to what you heard from those folks, either the wind energy companies or Mr. Nolan, as to you'd like to see more definition as to a particular attribute such as DBC. Once we get through that and we have essentially a good idea of what the Planning Commission feels on this, then we can move it along to our legal counsel. And I'm sure legal counsel will do just what Mr. Nolan did as well, is make sure that we catch those little spots in there that could be subject to litigation or it could be subject to interpretation. We want this to be as black and white as possible, so that there can be no chinks in the armor, essentially. So if I can, I will start, unless anyone has any questions, what I just went through. If not, staff did make changes primarily to, let's start with sound. We tried to define better the sound instead of noise particularly. We kept the non-participating property. But what it really comes down to is we came to a private or commercial WECS shall not exceed 50 decibel LAA max. Tonight, it's talked about that this was a significant increase. The wind turbine companies, when they commented, said that this was somewhat limiting as to restricting the use in the community. Some even provided distances in feet that would increase the setback.
45 does appear in other ordinances. 55 seems to be kind of the middle of the road of the ordinances that we reviewed. As far as DBC, if that's something you'd like us to further investigate, the low frequency decibel read, that's something that we can put in there. It was talked about earlier that we will create an enforcement nightmare with some of the items that we are recommending. This is going to be an enforcement nightmare no matter what. We also deal with surface mines and those sorts of activities that are sometimes ambiguous as to what is in violation of the ordinance and how we are able to enforce that given the limitations on staff resources. This is not for Shiawassee County only. Many communities deal with this. Larger urban areas deal with it. Some communities are considered overly restricted and folks don't want to move in because of the regulations. So again, staff is trying to provide you some sort of balancing here, but I would like to open that up to discussion with the Planning Commission. Where do you see us lying on the 50 decibel where we are at now, staff is?
Under sound level 3, it said that sound generated shall not exceed 50 decibels with LA max at any non-participating. What about participating?
There would be no issue there. That would be the landowner leasing their property and taking the consequences of that action.
Could you just quiet for just 1 second? We're running 45 decibels right now. We can hear you too. It's right there. We're reading 45 decibels before we speak.
Okay, just to clarify to the planning commissioners, you have several documents in front of you. One is labeled Exhibit B. That's our language that we have in place right now that was adopted by our county commissioners on June 16th, 2016. This is the language that's in place. You have another packet in front of you that has blue edits made. It's dated March 20th, 2018 draft. And then the other fully black and white copy is also dated March 20th, 2018 draft. And that's the same version with the blue updates without being blue.
My name is Thomas Foster. I'm a member of the New Haven Township Board. I'm a trustee, and I have some notes from the discussion we had as a township regarding changes to the ordinance, and I'd like to read them to you. I'll start out by a board discussion regarding proposed changes to the Shiawassee County Ordinance, Article 4, specific use regulations for wind energy conversion systems. The Planning Commission meeting at the county level will take place on October 25th, and the proposed changes will be reviewed at that time. Motion by Trustee Foster suggested a dBA and a dBC levels to be at 40 and 50 respectively. No support for the motion. It was suggested 40 dBA is low. It was stated those being paid will tolerate noise level better than those not. Motion by Supervisor Hill, supported by Treasurer Eichel, to set the standard dBA C to 45. A roll call was taken. It was unanimously approved. Motion carried. Motion by Treasurer Eichel, supported by Supervisor Hill, to recommend the Shiawassee County Ordinance include a standard noise level for participating parcels also, as it is not currently included in the language. A roll call was taken. It was unanimously approved. Motion carried. Motion by Clerk Farr, supported by Supervisor Hill, to recommend the Shiawassee County Ordinance setback for participating parcels be raised from 100 to 250%. A roll call was taken. Supervisor Hill, Clerk Farr, Trustee Foster voted yes. Treasurer Eichholt, Trustee LaCure voted no. The motion carried. Motion by Trustee LaCure, supported by Supervisor Hill, to accept the non-participating parcel setback at the current suggested 300%. A roll call was taken. Supervisor Hill, Trustee LaCure voted yes. Clerk Farr, Trustee Foster, and Treasurer Eichholz voted no. Motion failed. Motion by Trustee Foster, supported by Clerk Farr, to recommend the Shiawassee County ordinance setback be modified to 400%. A roll call was taken. Supervisor Hill, Clerk Farr, Trustee Foster voted yes. Treasurer Eichholt and Trustee LaCure voted no. Motion carried.
Mr. Foster, we want to stay focused on the decibel level at this point.
Okay, well, what I'm trying to get at is, you said 6 out of the 9 trusts, or 9 out of 14 have given information back. The information that our township gave does not come close to what we have in the printed copy today. So I just want to finish up. Motion by Supervisor Hill, supported by Clerk Farr, to recommend Shiawassee County ordinance right-of-way for roads be increased from 100 to 150%. A roll call was taken. It was unanimously approved. The motion carried. Motion by Supervisor Hill, supported by Trustee LaCure, to recommend Shiawassee County ordinance shadow flicker read none allowed. A roll call was taken. Supervisor Hill, Clerk Farr, Trustee Foster, Trustee LaCure voted yes. Treasurer Eichholt voted no. Motion by Trustee Foster to set the maximum height for a commercial WEX to be limited to 300 feet. No support for the motion. It failed. Motion by Trustee Eichholt, supported by Trustee LaCure, to recommend the maximum height of a commercial WEX to be limited to 500 feet. A roll call was taken. Clerk Farr, Treasurer Eichholt, Trustee LaCure voted yes. Supervisor Hill and Trustee Foster voted no. The motion did carry. Motion by Trustee Foster, supported by Clerk Farr, to recommend the Shiawassee County ordinance read no interference for TV, cellular, radio, or microwave be allowed. A roll call was taken. Supervisor Hill, Clerk Farr, and Trustee Foster voted yes. Treasurer Eichholt and Trustee LaCure voted no. The motion carried. Planning Commission Chair Dan Winters noted that the New Haven Township Planning Commission is set to meet on September 4th to review and discuss the wind ordinance and noted these changes.
Thank you, Mr. Foster.
Thank
We'll
you.
move on.
Go back to my original question. To the Planning Commission, staff has recommended 50 dBA rather than the 45 that was originally done, which was down from the original 55 with the 45 at the exterior of the structure. So the 50 would be from a non-participating parcel boundary. A lot of review was done based on that, and a lot of the comments taken from the public and the townships that why should property that is non-participating, why should any portion of their property be subject to an increased sound level in case they decided they would like to either develop or use that portion of property. And that's why we moved away from the exterior of the structure and put it at the non-participating parcel line.
I personally would be more comfortable with the 45 as opposed to the 50.
Same here.
I support Bob.
So the original ordinance, though, it was at 55?
55 at the non-participating parcel line, and it was 45 at the exterior of a principal structure.
So if it's 45 at the property line, it would be less than that at a principal structure.
Yes.
The Rush Township Board sent us a resolution dated October 30th, and their suggestion was 45 dBA.
Wasn't, in one of our rewrites, wasn't it listed as 45?
The document that was submitted for township review at that meeting, with the, including the 500 feet, but could go up to 600 feet, as well as the 300% setback, was sent to the townships. That's where we were at.
I'm
Based-
trying to, I'm sorry, go ahead, Pete.
No, based on the comments that we received from the wind turbine companies, as well as modifications to other ordinances in communities in Michigan, we moderated towards the 50. But again, this is something that the Planning Commission now needs to look at staff and say, for Shiawassee County, and you're not just speaking for the residents of Shiawassee County, you're also speaking for, as I originally said, our premise should be your premise as well, that you are protecting the rights of the property owner and you're protecting the rights of the general public.
In a document dated October 5th, 2017, Perry Township also sent a communication stating their suggestion 50 at the property line. And this should all be in your packets, and just, you know, reminding you of what we've discussed in the past.
Could we have a roll call vote on 45?
We're just looking at a consensus right now to move forward for the public hearing.
And a motion could be made, just realize you're not adopting. Now I gotta talk loud. Okay.
Yeah, he's one of ours.
Well, I could, I'll start getting back, down in the back. So essentially, you can take a consensus vote. Just realize that you're not acting on the language amendment. You're essentially giving staff your guidance based on our recommendation. We will bring that to legal counsel to come up with a final public hearing document that will be heard at a public hearing. We hope to find a venue that's more centralized in Shiawassee County. We realize that a lot of folks in the northeast quadrant are also either leasing land or know that their neighbors have leased land. So we'll try to get back central. So a motion can be made.
Consensus vote to give direction would be
So
just.
moved.
Yeah, I guess I would like to make that as a consensus motion, that we do support staff in the direction of the 45 decibels.
Staff is right now recommending 50.
But I guess I'm going with a consensus of moving that back to 45.
Mr. McMaster?
Didn't we also hear from somebody from the industry said that, say earlier, that 45 was acceptable to them also?
Yeah, the 45 to 55,
right?
wasn't it?
Was that what was said?
I think it was, this gentleman right
If I
here.
may, that
Yeah.
was, I am saying that at the residence, not on
Right.
the property line.
Okay.
That's a big distinction, please.
Okay, good to know, good to know.
So there's been a motion. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and supported that we have a consensus of 45 dBA at the property line.
Yes, yeah, property line,
All in favor?
on the non-participating property.
All opposed? Motion carries.
I'll put it right back. The second item that we looked at was height. Previously, we had 600 feet that was adopted as part of our overall ordinance before this process was requested by the Board of Commissioners for the Planning Commission to open this up and review. At that time, staff did drop to 500 feet with the caveat that it could go up to 600 if it could be shown by the applicant that less turbines would be situated. So now we have come back And just simply put, shall not exceed, well, actually, Mr. Nolan put shall not exceed, which we'll make that correction. I'm sure our legal counsel would be doing that as well, just to clarify and keep with other language. So right now, staff is recommending that the maximum height be 500 feet.
With no exceptions to Rule 600?
There'd be no exceptions other than variance, but that would be, I think, a difficult burden to prove substantial hardship or meet the conditions under the State Enabling Act for that to be essentially variance material.
Perry Township also agreed with the 500 height limitation. Again, same document dated October 5th, 2017. There is not a height on the Hazelton Township paper from Jim Sheridan, supervisor.
If I could ask a question, Madam Chair, or Pete, what's the height of the ones north of us in Gratiot County?
400 to 450, aren't they?
Yeah.
4.5.
What I understand is that all the ones through that 127 corridor are less than 500 feet. It's my understanding that the ones that are, I understand construction to start in Coe Township, which is at the southeast corner of Isabella County, just north of the wind turbines in Gratiot County, that those are 485 feet from base to furthest extent of the tip of a blade.
Okay, further, Burns Township did not have a height specification. Woodhull Township suggested 400 feet.
Madam Chair, is Mr. Sinclair still here?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Those wind towers you have out in Iowa, what is the average height on those?
I'm not from Iowa.
Okay.
I will defer to somebody else on that.
All right, so right now, our existing ordinance is in place. Do we have any suggestions or recommendations
Do we
or
keep it?
questions?
I'm at 450 max. That's where I am right now, as of today.
And right now, the ordinance reads 600 from,
500 with the 600 as an option.
right.
By
That's
staff.
just sent to the townships.
Right.
Right now, staff is recommending that you consider 500 feet being the max.
At this point, I guess I'm comfortable with the 500. And again, though, that ties very closely into the setback issue.
Are you making that motion?
I said that.
I'm also at the 500.
It's been moved and supported that the height restriction be at 500 feet. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign.
Aye.
2 names.
2 nays. Motion carries.
So consensus of 500.
Okay, as was just mentioned, that the height of the tower plays very much a role in determining the setback. Originally, when we developed the ordinance, I believe it was 1.5 times from a non-participating parcel. That was changed after a substantial amount of public comment to 300%. At that 300%, we were at what I would consider the extreme of the other communities that we reviewed in the state of Michigan that either had turbines proposed or in all likelihood would have them. Some of them were, I guess, outliers. And so, but this was at the extreme end. Based upon the comments received from the companies involving wind turbines, and again, other communities that are reviewing and adopting regulation, we moved that down to 200%. So you just established a maximum height of 500 feet. As proposed to you right now, that would mean from a non-participating parcel line that it would be 1,000 feet. If the max.
The question I would ask is, what did the townships come back with?
I can address that again with the documentation that I have in front of me. Woodhull Township recommended a setback of 150% from non-participating property lines.
Yeah.
New Haven was 400%.
The Rush Township Board suggested 150%. Again, Rush Township was 150%.
Because they turned down the planning. What was Middlebury?
I don't think they've returned theirs.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know if we got anything from them.
I believe we're still waiting on Middlebury.
There was no specifics for Bennington Township. No specifics that's from Perry Township. Hazelton Township, 4 times the height of the tower, or 2,000 feet. And quite honestly, what I have in front of me for Fairfield is a multi-page document where they had made edits, but there's nothing as far as line-by-line specifics.
400%.
Where's the supervisor?
New Haven Township also suggested 150%.
No, it was 400 on something.
Based on what height of the tower?
Well, can we allow the planning commission to deliberate? Just, it really helps them to walk through this. They're walking through it together.
Yep, that is correct. 150% setback to a public right-of-way, 400% setback to the property line, and again, that's New Haven.
If you could put this like into, if you had a square, and you had, depending on the percent here and the height, but give us some ideas, if you had just a square and you put a wind turbine in the middle, what acreage are we talking about when we're doing
Percentage.
the percentages? Do you have any
Well,
translation for us?
You're talking if we put a turbine in the middle of a section, how much acreage around?
Yeah, let's say
that
we have a square, and you know, one side you got a road, and on one side you got a not participating, and the other side you're not participating. How big is that square, like acreage wise?
Well, let's just take, for example, 1320 by 1320 is a 40-acre parcel. So if you were to put in the middle of a 40-acre parcel a 500-foot turbine, it would not fit with the setbacks if it were surrounded by non-participating properties.
1 in 40 acres, you couldn't do it.
Well, if you,
Not with our 500 feet.
again, but think of how the, you know, they have to essentially, depending on your regulation, may have to lease additional land in order to meet that setback. And that's the argument sometimes. How can that be unreasonable to have a large setback? All the turbine company has to do is lease more property.
Mr. McMaster, I will send this document down to you again. I reviewed all of this in 5.5 hours last night again, so I'm just trying to keep things organized, but I will send this down to you, and it shows a setback map of what it could look like.
So if you had a 350-foot turbine and you had 200% setback, that possibly could go in the middle of a 40. So you would have more smaller turbines and less larger turbines. We don't know. We hear that there's leases. We've not investigated where those leases are. We've been provided maps from the public based on FAA determinations. We don't know. We do not have an application, folks. We are not having conversations with the wind turbine companies as to where would you put it here, how would you do that. We're trying to develop a regulation that we feel will accommodate reasonably a particular use, just like the county has to reasonably accommodate other types of uses, those that are considered toxic or not have a great impact on the community. Most of those types of uses are able to be squeezed back in an industrial park off that old highway. We've reasonably accommodated that particular use. This is a little different. The scope and size of this particular use definitely needs to be taken into consideration. Litigation over time, as Mr. Nolan mentioned, there's been a decision. Whether that decision is going to be ultimately appealed, we don't know. But so you're trying to, you don't have all the information. I don't have all the information. Nobody in the audience has all the information. But you're trying to, again, meet the interest of the property owner that is leasing property for a particular use, and for those that live in the area that did not sign up, keeping them from having their personal use and enjoyment taken by this particular use.
Comment, we could go to the Register of Deeds and get a plot map, and they would show which parcels have been leased and which have not.
Have you went to Register of Deeds and found, they have a plot map showing where that's been leased?
Right.
Okay, we have not done that.
Okay.
We do not have an application. I would consider that almost maybe an overreach of staff if it was found that we were looking at where leased properties were and how to particularly accommodate the use. We've kept the distance as far as we can.
I can bring some to tomorrow's meeting if you like.
Okay, that's fine. That's up to the planning commission. Any planning commissioner is welcome to bring any information. I'm going to shy away from that because I do not want to be perceived as trying to plan this out for any person.
Economically, the shorter the tower, the more they would have to put up in order to
capture the wind.
Right. Make a profit.
Right.
Is that correct?
No idea. I would ask somebody who
That is correct. My name is Ryan Dykstra, I'm a Tradewind as well. If we are trying to build 100 megawatts, for example, we would need. Hello, I'm Ryan Dykstra. I'm a Tradewind too. I just want to add a little clarity here on a couple things. If we're going to build 100 megawatts of wind, and we're capped below 450 or 500 feet, we're going to need to use smaller turbines and therefore more of them. Another point I want to make is we're discussing 1.5 or 2 times the setback, or the tip height of a turbine as it relates to a setback, is that under 50 decibels at a property line, we're way over that. We're talking about leasing hundreds of acres of property for a single turbine.
So we were at 300% when it was sent to the townships. We were originally at 1.5 or 150%, and now what staff has provided to you is 200%. Again, what staff has provided you is a 200. You've been provided all the information from the others, and so staff is looking for some direction to hopefully move this along to a public hearing and finalize this, I think, for the interest of all.
I make a motion to keep it at 300% from the.
Support.
been moved and supported. Is there any deliberation among the among the planning commissioners?
Yes, I still need a visual picture. If we go with the 200, how many turbines could a person put in a 40-acre parcel? Zero. But for those that say, yay, I want some, not so good.
They would have to lease more property.
They'd have to lease more property.
Excuse me, this is a planning commission question.
So I'm just trying to get a visual here. So with that motion, or that consensus motion,
Is it 300%?
At 300%.
So if it's at 300% and the turbine height was 500, it would need a 1,500-foot setback from a non-participating property line. So that means it could not be accommodated on a 40, most likely couldn't be accommodated on an 80, so additional acreage would be needed to pick up. In order to meet setback, they would need more participating properties.
So what was 200%?
What would 200%? Well, it would be a 1,000-foot setback and would not be reasonably accommodated on a single 40, stretching it on possibly an 80.
Yeah. We provided a diagram with ours that measures the 300%, which is shown as a 1,500-foot setback, versus what it would be as a 1.5. And you can see that
Yes.
as the,
There we go.
the area there. You can see the difference. That was provided.
Does any of the other planning commissioners need to see that particular diagram?
Madam Chair, may I make a brief comment? Very brief comment.
Okay, we have a motion on the table, but yes.
So we're discussing right now how many turbines they can fit in and do so economically. But what we're ignoring is what can be done safely. And as I pointed out to you, Nordex and Vestas require that people retreat 500 meters upwind. That's 1,640 feet. So
Who's-
you're gonna.
Who's ignoring safety?
No, we're not, that's not being the focus of the discussion right now. I'm not saying, maybe I misspoke there.
That's
I shouldn't
okay.
have said ignore. But it's not getting the focus that it deserves. Economics are great, but safety's primary. You can't spend the money if you're dead. So as we sit here, if we know that the turbine manufacturers recommend a safety zone of 500 meters, 1,640 feet, I don't see why the discussion is anything less than that for someone's home. You
Because
can't
that's been
move.
retracted and they've taken out of context.
It came directly from their owner operators.
At this point in time, the planning commission needs to deliberate on that.
And I believe the motion is for 300% as originally provided to the townships, and that was seconded.
Yes.
I would like to make a motion to amend that to 350%.
With that being said, we're having consensus. I guess maybe would you accept that as an amendment, or do you want to have it voted on your original motion?
We need to vote on the original motion at 300. Once discussion is complete, is there any other discussion from the planning commission? All right. The motion was for 300. Yes, sir.
Should we have a roll call vote?
This is a consensus, not a roll call.
Thank you.
The original motion was for 300 times the height setback, and it was seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Motion fails.
I'd like to make a motion to have the setback be 350%.
I'll support.
It's been moved and supported that the setback be 350%. Any discussion?
And the kind of the reason I arrived at that is because we have some townships that wanted 400%, some that were at 300. So I split the difference there.
Somewhere at one.
Some were 150. Yeah, some were.
It's been moved and supported, 350 feet. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Aye.
Did you get that count? How about those that supported the 350% to raise their hands? Those that did not want the 350%? Okay, so the motion fails. So.
Okay, so where are we at now?
We need a new motion.
Higher? Make a motion for 325%.
I'll second it.
Support. It's been moved and supported for 325%. Is there any deliberation or questions among the planning commission? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries 325.
While we have you folks on a roll, let's tackle shadow flicker. Now, previously, I'm not gonna let you out of here, Dan. Hey, it's not 10, it is not 10 o'clock yet. Yes, sir.
I would rather tackle the red light before we go start.
With the,
I think that'd be easier to tackle.
Mr. Nolan discussed, right, right now, our language essentially conditions it on the FAA. My understanding, and Mr. Nolan has said that that is an accepted technology now to have the red light that's required by the FAA to turn on only when the corresponder or the responder, whatever the technical language is in an airplane, is nearby. That's when the red light would flash. It would not necessarily, and I'm not sure, flash on all of the turbines at once. It would only affect those that the airplane is nearby. Now, it was my understanding that that was not adopted by the FAA. Mr. Nolan says that it is an accepted practice of the FAA. So I would, you know, if you have questions particular to that, I would rely on questioning him again. What Isabella County did, I believe that it said something to the effect that if the technology becomes adopted by the FAA, then it would have to be installed. But I would suggest that you talk to Mr. Nolan.
failure rate of that, you know?
I do not know. I think it's a brand new technology, so I don't know if the chair wishes to recognize Mr. Nolan.
Mr. Nolan, do you have anything to say on the topic?
Certainly. You're not relying upon me. That information came directly from NextEra's representatives. That was part of a public hearing in Juniata Township, and I can provide you with the transcript so you can be certain that you're not relying upon me, but rather representatives of the wind energy industry. My apologies. They are the ones that said that it was that it's been approved for use in the project, I believe, in North Dakota, and they proposed the use of that technology in Juniata Township as well. I think Mr. Preston's cautionary statement to include language to the extent it's approved by the FAA makes perfect sense because it is a relatively new technology. But again, these are not my words. This comes from NextEra Energy Resources, the largest wind developer in the world.
And that was in Tuscola County, again, Tuscola County, correct?
Tuscola County, Juniata Township, public hearing, January 3rd, 2018, and unfortunately continued for 2 more days after that.
Madam Chair, I would suggest that maybe we recognize the representative from Tradewind.
Yep, absolutely. If any industry representatives have any statements.
No, Mr. Nolan makes a good point. I mean, this is a technology that's new, it's coming out. The industry has known for a long time that there is a nuisance at nighttime for the red lights. The only thing that I might suggest on top of that is, because it is in such its infancy, language in other townships, you can look up to Pine River or Coa Township in Isabella, Pine River and Gratiot, saying that, hey, this technology be reviewed at some point down the line. Maybe now's not the time to mandate an untested or fully proven technology, but hey, put in the ordinance after 3 years or after 5 years. Say we will review this and see if it's there. I'm just saying that's one thing that's been done. So it's there to happen. All we know is there's never been a plane that has hit a turbine with the light on. So there is a time when this technology is coming here, and it could be coming down the road. I'm not saying that you're going to have a project even here tomorrow or next month or next year,
but that provides another review time coming forward. It's been adopted elsewhere, and I just want to provide that kind of coverage.
Thank you.
So to answer your question, we're not 100% sure that this is adopted technology by the FAA. It does sound like something that could benefit some of the concerns in the community with that. So I open it again to your discussion. Again, we can follow the Isabella model, or it'd be added in there as language upon a full approval and use by the FAA, or full approval for use by the FAA.
I make a motion that we accept that, because I know what it's like to be out there and seeing a red light flash. If they all come on at once, the whole sky turns red. So,
Support.
All right. Can you repeat that motion, well, exactly how you would like to?
then as soon as the FCC approves it, we put it in place.
Just to clarify, FAA.
FAA.
FCC is the
Sure.
So at this time, it's been moved and seconded that we have some type of language that staff can research to include technology to eliminate red light. Is there any discussion among the planning commission? Yes, sir.
Is this a radar thing, Mr. Nolan?
It is
A radar light?
Yes.
Okay.
There's also other technologies that will dim lights as well. There's multiple things being discussed out there as well. Just want to make that aware.
So as these technologies develop, we need to become aware of them and address our language as necessary. Are there any other comments from the planning commission? All right, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Is there anything else?
Well, we can move on to shadow flicker. Now, originally, I think that we were at, and somebody will have to, original. I think that it was somewhere around 30 hours on a actual principal structure. That was moved to 0 at a non-participating parcel line. That was done with the same rationale that, with noise, that why should that person, because they have a farm field, be subjected to additional flicker or additional sound when they may wish to use that for some other purpose. So we put it at 0. Based on the comments we've seen from, the turbine companies, as well as other ordinances, it seemed like we were, again, on the overly restrictive side of that. So what we came up with was 24 hours. 24 hours in layman's terms is like a day out of 365 that a non-participating parcel would be affected by shadow flicker. So if 30s, this seems to be more in line with what other communities. We put it at 24. The expectations of the ordinance is that substantial modeling be done to show that it will not be a problem. As far as the enforcement issue, yes, that's going to be difficult. It's my understanding that sometimes these shadow flickers can go a long way as far as the eye can perceive. But that may be one blade width. Is that, you're going to enforce that? How do we catch that? It's a difficult scenario. There are technologies out there that can limit that, but we were kind of looking at a hard line. So what was sent to the township was 0% at a non-participating property line, meaning that even if someone decided in the future on a non-participating property to build a structure, they would get 0%. Okay? If what we changed that to was the 24 hours, industry standard being 30, so if somebody on their back 20 acres or back 40 that's currently vacant, they didn't want to participate, wants to build a house, they would receive no more than 24 hours in a given year of shadow flicker. The company would have to model that onto that non-participating property. So again, I open it to your discussion. Again, 0% at a non-participating property line, no matter what, this is going to be very difficult to enforce. We will rely heavily on the modeling that's conducted by the industry The county can hire an engineer to review that, and then we've made those allowances. So, I mean, again, I leave it to you folks. We're at 24 hours, non-participating property line.
Pete, I guess I have a question. During some of our earlier meetings and discussions, we heard that, again, technology, similar to the red light issue. Gosh, it seems like I could come up with a better term. Anyway, having to do with shadow flickering and the industry's ability to turn off said turbines remotely, not having to go out to the turbine itself, but remotely certain hours of the day based on the placement of the sun, season, day of the week, and it all could be programmed so that there would be during certain times of year, certain times of day, it could be, certain turbines could be, the rotation shut down. Did I hear that right? Okay.
At this time, could we ask an industry representative to shed some light on that?
I mean, yes, as far as I know, kind of as I explained kind of briefly here, I mean, it is a geometry problem. You know where shadows are going to be, and that can all be put out, you know, at the beginning and the onset. I think, you know, these technologies, I've heard about them. I have not, in my industry, known for them coming on anytime soon here to be placed on turbines there. Again, the review that we're doing now currently is we'll know where the dots on the map will go. We'll know for each position that turbine is turning for each hour, each minute of each year, we'll know where the shadows go, and that's what's included on our study there. And again, I think the point there is, and this is for you guys to all determine, is that point of reference and where it comes. And that's what, you know, as an industry, we respect what the community is going to say. Again, is it reasonable for a corner property or something there? That's for you guys to determine. I can tell you exactly where the shadows are going to go, and then it's for you guys to determine where that point of reference is and how onerous that reference will be.
Thank you.
Okay, and in your packets, there is a document for shadow flicker. Again, if you haven't seen that, I can pass that down. It just shows the butterfly shape, geographic position of the shadow flicker within that area.
Madam Chair, I believe Mr. Nolan has a comment.
If I may, Ms. Reno, this is actually in red line. It's kind of in a comment on the side, so.
May have been a little bit difficult to see, but to my understanding, there are two manufacturers that currently make the software and receptors that you're referring to. There is the Shadow Impact Module SIM by Northtech GmbH and a shadow detection system by Vestas. So those are out there that staff could investigate further to look at mitigating the shadow flicker problem so that it's not a problem for your residents.
Thank you. And Dr. Ellenbogen, did you have anything additional that you'd like to share regarding shadow flicker?
Hi, thank you. The only thing that I would add from shadow flicker is that I have heard many people raise a wide variety of health concerns, including epileptic seizures and so forth, and I can tell you that it just doesn't happen. One can be annoyed by them. They don't cause seizures. They just don't. And so that's an issue that can be easily put to rest. I think it's a question of whether people find them annoying or not.
Okay, thank you.
What did the township say? Fairfield, 0.
That's because they went out with 0.
If I can just comment real quickly, I would rather not identify a specific technology in our ordinance. Others, you know, may come up with additional. You could hire a guy named Joe and have him sit at the bottom of the wind turbine and press a button to stop it at a certain time. So I don't want to limit it to that. But you need to consider, is 24 hours in a given year, is that reasonable accommodation for a use? Is 0% at a non-participating property, is that unreasonable? Either way, I think that our ordinance is on the restrictive side of shadow flicker when we compare ourselves to others that have adopted ordinances.
Pete, the 24 to 30 hours, is that is that like over, when we talk about being in a year, but that being the industry standard, is that in case like one breaks down and the blade is hanging over a piece of property and that's why it's 24 hours, gives them time to fix it? Or is that's 24 hours meaning that throughout the year there will be some flicker?
Yeah, 24 hours, sometime, and within a period of 365 days in a given year, they're gonna need to model and show us that on non-participating properties, that they not be affected by shadow flicker for 24 hours in that given year. So it may be 2 minutes on July 7th, it may be 1 minute on July 8th, and then maybe it'll spike back up in the winter.
So what happens if, instead of it going around and casting the shadow as it moves around, what if it stops, breaks down, and it's casting a shadow? And it takes more than a day.
It's not flicker. It's not flicker.
But you're still gonna have a shadow though.
But not flicker.
But you're still gonna have a shadow.
I'm going to ask the audience to please refrain from discussion right now so that everyone can hear.
This is,
Get a shallow fluctuation.
okay, that's not a problem then.
I think it's gotta be rotating somehow to get a flicker. That's what would bother you, is a flicker, not just a shadow. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would just think a shadow would be more intrusive than a flicker, but.
So, flicker would not be a problem at night.
No.
So,
Oh, well, actually, there was a
you let me talk,
conversation.
please. Flicker is not a problem at night. So should, Madam Chair?
Yes.
I would appreciate it if the audience would.
I completely agree. Go ahead.
So shouldn't it be like 12 hours during the daylight hours in a year's time?
That's entirely up to the planning commission. If you think that that's reasonable for the particular use, not be deemed unreasonable, and you think it's to a benefit of the adjacent property owner or the property owner, 3 parcels away, that they not receive more than 12 hours of shadow flicker in a given year, then absolutely.
Well, my first choice would be 0, but that seems to be not feasible, so dependent upon it.
Pete, what is the industry standard based on the ordinances that you've researched with staff?
Primarily, it's been 30 hours, and I can't quote me on it right now, but that's either on a structure or on a non-participating parcel.
A question to Mr. Nolan. Do you have an idea of what this technology costs per tower?
I do not have any cost figures for this technology per tower. My understanding is that this is a 1% to 2% of the total project cost to put it over the entire project. So again, you're asking those who are going to profit from the project to incur that cost, as opposed to forcing those non-participating residents to sit outside with a video camera, a stopwatch, and a logbook. Because I would profess that any amount of shadow flicker that you allow essentially turns into an unlimited amount of shadow flicker, because your residents, like most of America, are going to be at work, and they're not going to be able to sit there with a stopwatch and a video camera to keep track of this. And so if you allow any shadow flicker, you might as well have it unlimited, because you're going to have a ordinance regulation that's nearly impossible to enforce.
I'm just throwing it out there. Steve, if you want to make a motion.
Let me make this suggestion. Dependent upon the use of technology from Nortec and Vestas, if it's deemed feasible, we would go with 0% shadow flicker, because these will, in turn, if they work as they're supposed to work, they'll shut the machine down, correct?
Correct. I would again hesitate to reference specific technology. So if you wanted to have a standard until such time that a proven technology, but it sounds like from Mr. Nolan's description that these have been put into place, and he's talking about a 1% to 2% cost to to the wind energy company, I would hesitate from the planning commission making any decisions on any cost to anyone, and just, again, look at the reasonableness. If you want to put that a certain period of time on property until technology is proven to make it 0%, then it's 0%. I think we could probably develop language like that.
I would say either we do that or we table this discussion until we get more research on this technology. I think to do one or the other.
It could be years.
He says that already it's working. So I guess it would take me a day to find out if it's working or not. I don't know.
If
there's technologies out there, there's really these companies, and it's really working, maybe we should look into it.
Well, but I think that you can still make a motion to move this forward by just saying, and if technology is proven to affect this, we still have it there. If it's proven right off the bat, you're where you're at, without even having to postpone any discussion here.
I'll make a motion that, dependent upon the available technology and its successful utilization, that we enforce a 0% shadow flicker.
Support.
It's been moved and supported. Is there any discussion among the commissioners?
I think that zero's awfully low.
Yeah, so
I do too. I do too.
I think 20%.
Unreasonable to be 0 at this time, until that we can look at that technology.
Well, that's dependent upon the technology.
Okay, it's been moved and supported.
24 to 0 and the other way around.
So if technology is, you say 0% of technology is proven, if technology is not proven, what is the regulation?
Then we're out. Our ordinance is out of compliance.
Then we have a fallback. If the technology is approved, we sustain 0% shadow flicker. If the technology does not,
And what would your recommendation be?
Well, if technology is not proven, then it's still 0%.
Yeah,
No.
yeah, see, that's.
Then what is it?
Back to-
then we'll go to, as Bob said, 12.
I didn't say
Before, did you? Who said 12?
There's a motion on the table that's been supported for 0% pending technology. We need to vote on that. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Motion fails.
I missed the motion. What?
It was motion for 0 pending technology.
I make a motion that we put it at 20% until technology catches on.
Here's a good minute.
20 hours.
Folks,
20
we're
hours.
trying to work through this as well.
excuse
20
me.
hours. Okay.
20 hours.
Support.
It's been moved and supported that we go with 20-hour limit on shadow flicker. Any discussion among the commissioners?
And that is now related to technology.
The motion is not related to technology as it sits right now. Remember, this is the language that we're putting forth at the public hearing. It's been moved and supported at 20 hours of shadow flicker. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, well, it is 9:20. Normally, we try to wrap up a planning commission by 10 p.m. We do have public comments at the end of our agenda as well. Is there anything else the planning commission would like to address?
Madam Chair. I have 2 items. One would be on page 11.
Which document are you looking at, Mr. McMaster?
The one that has the red and the blue ink on it.
Dated March 20th, 2018.
Yes. Okay, so on page 11, it would be under H, additional considerations, number 2, color and appearance. Talks about structural improvement shall be painted neutral color that is acceptable to Shiawassee County or otherwise required by law. I'm just curious, what colors are those? Can we set those colors? Who sets those colors? Is that gonna be up to the zoning department? Is that up to us? Do we need to specify? I'm just throwing that out there.
it could be considered as part of the planning commission's review of a special land use. A lot of cell tower companies use the joke that it has to be Michigan gray, so that it blends in with the, it's either a light gray or a steel type color. You can absolutely specify, however, again, if you say gray and the industry is using white, put them at a little bit of disadvantage. If you wait to see what's being proposed and it's not hot pink, then you're probably in the good. Is my suggestion, but again, this part of this language is definitely open to the planning commission discussion.
Okay. Well, I have one more. Further down the page on K, studies, 1, migratory game birds. This talks about doing a study ahead of time. I'd like to come up with different language where after, if the project does go in, a year later, 2 years later, there's another study done to find out if there's been displacement or not. Not necessarily death of the birds, but displacement. And then if there is displacement, then some kind of a assessment or something on the wind energy companies that provides habitat in a different area or help fund build habitat in another area for the birds that have been displaced. And I can work on that with your staff or whatever, but you could do a study ahead of time and say, okay, yeah, there's birds here and we don't think they're going to be affected, and 2 years later we could go through and do a turkey count or a pheasant count and find out that the birds have been displaced. And I just think as a matter of conservation, money should be spent then to build habitat wherever, in a different area where these birds have gone. So.
All right, do you recommend that that be a motion, Mr. McMahon?
No, it's more of a conversation right now, and I know this is kind of a working document, and maybe we do this when it gets to the Board of Commissioners, and maybe we do it now. I'm just kind of throwing it out there to see what the rest of the Planning Commission thinks of that.
I like follow-up. Yeah, I think that's an excellent idea. Because again, we're here to establish a baseline, and that would be an ideal time.
Okay, so let me, I'm not ready tonight to make a motion for language, but let me work on something and. They do. They do.
Is there anything else?
That's all I have. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, also under case studies, I noticed that these 2 studies apply only to commercial. Should they also apply to private?
Well, what we're working on right now, Mr. Edmeyer, is the commercial ordinance more so than the private wind energy ordinance. So we could definitely address that at our revision rewrite committee meeting.
One of the things that staff has noted and will correct is that we have a prohibition on interference from for radio and television and such. We will add that. That was omitted previously. Before I let you back to public comment, DBC, the subsonic sound. That is not typical of it's not middle ground. It's getting there in some communities. Our staff are not experts on it. If you define something, then we'll put it in there. We will discuss with our legal counsel and make sure that we get additional input. But do you wish to see the DBC level in there established as well?
I would like to see it myself.
I'll support that.
I would also like some input from Mr. Hankard if he is willing to give us a little input on the DBC.
So DBA, which you are most familiar with, the A is just a designation, but it corresponds to the way humans hear. We don't hear low frequencies as well as we hear high frequencies. That's why fire sirens are at 1,000 hertz, get our attention. DBC is a completely different scale, and so it doesn't work the way the human ear works. It's basically takes all of the signal in without weighting it. So the weighting, when I say the word weighting, we don't hear, again, low frequencies as well. So when I have a sound level meter and I put it on the A, I move the button to A, waiting, it does the same thing our ears does. So it takes those low frequency energies and it discounts them much the way our ear does. When you move the button over to C, that no longer happens, and now it's just the noise coming in pretty much as it is in the environment. So that wouldn't be how the human ear hears it, but that's how it is being produced.
And what I'm looking at is farm animals, dogs, cows, pigs, where their hearing applies also, because it can affect those animals.
I have done many wildlife noise research, literature reviews, and most of them center around overflights of extremely loud military aircraft as they affect nesting rare birds, things like that. In terms of general noise, there isn't a lot of study out there to prove one way or the other that these levels of noise impact wildlife or livestock.
I just wanted to find out what that is and find out what will affect the hearing.
So if I could make one more comment with the DBC, this has been much discussed. I attend these meetings all over the country. Everything you're dealing with tonight is you're not alone. Maybe that's comforting, maybe it's not. But when you limit something on a dBA scale, it limits every other part of the frequency spectrum. This whole concept that dBA doesn't appropriately limit low frequency noise is just completely wrong. Okay, once you set a dBA limit, the developers have to set their towers so far from homes to meet your limit or your property lines, wherever, right? And once that's done, low frequency noise is less, all the noise is less, because they all are related to distance. So once you control one, you control them all. And anybody who tells you otherwise is trying to throw a little red herring in your trade. And I feel that's disingenuous because you have enough in there as it is.
Thank you.
You do have some information in the packets that I provided from, thank you, sir. Acoustician Rick James has given some information in there regarding infrasound or low frequency noise. Typically what you will see is a 10-point increase. So if you're at 45 dBA, you should be looking at 55 dBc. And what I would take from Mr. Hankert's comment is that if you're taking care of it with the A-weighted noise limit, then there's certainly no harm in adding in a C-weighted noise limit, because as he's pointed out, it'll already be taken care of. And you'll provide some reassurances to your residents.
Put it back in the hands of the planning commission. If you'd like to make any changes, currently it's DBA only, and it would be at 45 at a non-participating parcel line, which would be substantially less at a exterior of a structure, possibly substantial, unless it's 10 feet off the property line.
I think our industry expert, Dr. Hinkert has stated that one would take care of the other, but it's the will of the commission. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm also concerned about the fact that Mr. Nolan has quoted Mr. James on 2 or 3 occasions. And if I recall back when we first started this, we received information that he wasn't quite up to standards as far as his knowledge of this. His statements were being questioned.
Well, we do have an industry expert here that is stated tonight, so we just need to make a decision and also ask, is it enforceable? If we put a DBC level out there, are we going to enforce it, and if so, how? And is it necessary, like Mr. Nolan said, if one takes care of the other? But it's up to the commission.
With the information that we've received at this point, I do not see an added value to doing a separate, the DCs. Yeah, I would go with R45 with DCB and leave it at that.
DBA.
DBA, thank you.
Second.
It's been moved and supported that we not add any additional language regarding DBC. Any other discussion among the commission? Okay. It's been moved and supported. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign.
Nay.
Motion carries.
I have nothing else, Madam Chair.
I have a couple questions, and I was going through it. I'm assuming it talks about escrow, it talks about a bond. I'm assuming those are two separate accounts?
Yes, the bond would be essentially a surety bond that could be drawn upon, such as in decommissioning, where the county knows that there be funds out there to do the decommissioning themselves if a project was abandoned or a turbine was abandoned. The escrow account has to do with an enforcement mechanism so that the county has the ability to hire experts to assess if maybe they haven't met their modeling criteria for either noise or shadow flicker. We're pretty good with the tape measure and can handle setback, but the rest of it's a little difficult for us. So majority of this, if I could finish, is that our legal counsel is going to be substantial in assisting us on these matters. They will explain out and they will detail out to the protection of the county in decommissioning and on the enforcement side.
Okay. How is the amount and say the escrow going to be determined?
The way that for the escrow is kind of left vague right now. We have what I feel is a problem in our overall ordinance. We actually do have some language in there supporting the use of escrow for that. So when we change one, we're going to have to change the other. So that is something that I'm deferring to have legal counsel look at. And as soon as, based on the discussion tonight, we're going to make those changes and submit it immediately to legal counsel so we can keep this ball rolling.
Okay. That's all I have.
Make a motion to adjourn.
We still have.
We have a couple.
All right, at this time, is there any additional public comment? And if you have not spoken yet, we do need you to fill out the papers so that we can reflect this in our minutes.
I have my DD meter working this entire meeting, and so far the highest we did is 88.8. We're averaging 67.8. The notice certified decibel level checker. It's it's a downloaded from the internet, and it's a pro. It means nothing basically. No certification. I'm just saying what I have on my phone. Okay. Because I mean it's useless. It is.
Okay, we'll stop there. Thank you. I see a couple of people ready. Again, your comments will be limited to 3 minutes. Charlene Timmons.
So I've learned a ton tonight, and I appreciate y'all having us here and listening to us, and we get to listen to you. I'm glad you adjusted interference at the end there, because that's a big concern of mine, and I didn't hear it mentioned until the very end. I appreciate it. Township board input concerns me greatly, because I know at least one of our board members has signed a lease. Did you ask that information when you took their information about what they wanted?
This is what was provided to me as a county, or as a planning commissioner.
I'm just asking you guys, if you took input from board members and you didn't know if they had a lease, would you be concerned?
We have one of our board members that has a lease, yes.
I'm just saying, so when you think about that and you're looking at what their input, it's not the same as me without a lease. And they are supposed to represent me. So I have a concern about that. Just wanted to raise that as a little point. I beg that you don't give controls away. I beg that if you set your ordinances, that you have a way to measure what you've said they must do, and that you have, and you enforce that measurement. Metrics are everything. I guarantee you, these guys live on metrics. They have little project managers that run around all day long talking about metrics. You need to do the exact same job. You need to make sure you have a way to measure what you've told them they must do, and then you have to do it, because they will not be waiting for you to do it. So please don't set anything that you can't measure. Know how you're going to measure it, and have a plan to keep measuring it. You have to do that. I appreciate the neurologist speech, but I will tell you, having many friends with neurological disorders, including my dad who died of ALS, that what you guys know and what you don't know, like, is immeasurable. You know, like this much.
I'm
So I
going to ask you
appreciate
to
your input.
please focus your comments on the planning commission.
He gave input, and I'm gonna tell you that they don't know everything. They know this much about this huge world. So just a thought about a neurologist's input on anything. They know what they know, and they don't know anything about what they don't know. I also appreciate Mr. Sinclair's information, especially the scary blue blob about where gas prices might go. That was very informative, and I appreciate that input. Most importantly, my house is my biggest investment. I'm trying to sell a property right near it right now at a price that it should have gone for, and it's not selling. Do you know why it's not selling in Hazelton Township? Because no one wants to live by a wind turbine. Who's gonna pay me my 20 grand that I expected to get out of that property? Nobody. I would like to sell my house. Guess what? I'm beginning to suspect I can't sell my house. My property taxes won't go down, my mortgage payment won't go down, but the value of my house is going to go down. It already is. Just the talk of wind turbines has reduced the value of my only large investment. And I beg you to think about it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Anita Malaturno. I live in Rush Township. Most of us there don't want the wind turbines. I think you know that. I think you can see that around you. That's why it's important that you represent us and not just go with what you think is best, but represent the people that hired you to your positions. A little note on what happened in Huron County this year, if you haven't heard. DTE came in and proposed plans for completion of the Fillion Wind Park in October. They also approved a wind overlay district in Bloomfield, Dwight, Lincoln, and Siegel Townships to allow the park to be sited. Residents that opposed that decision quickly responded by turning in approximately 1,200 signatures to force a referendum vote. Only 807 valid signatures were required to get this issue on the ballot. In December, a hesitant board, like yourselves, voted to approve an overlay in the Sherman and Siegel districts as requested by Huron Wind LLC. And again, the residents knocked on doors and collected enough signatures to force a vote. If either of those referendums were to fail, the companies would be forced to move their properties elsewhere. In May of 2017, the people spoke, and they overwhelmingly turned down the windmill project, and it passed because there's nothing they can do when the people speak, and we may have to do a referendum vote, we may have to gather signatures, but there is something we can do. A no vote from the voters, which was done then, was able to cease all activity on any current and future development plans in the county-zoned townships. So let's get together and maybe see what we can do other than this.
Entertain a motion.
No, there's more here. We got a couple more.
Right, I need you to come on up then.
You've made comment on the low frequency not being an issue, but firm in United Kingdom, where you've also made comment, Mr. Sinclair, that alternative energy is prospering and doing well. The low frequency problem is a problem. It needs to be addressed. Mr. Sinclair's presentation also mentioned the cost associated is going to be deferred or incurred, as you might want to look, to the taxpayers. It has been billions of dollars, subsidies. Well, they might be ending. Well, what if Congress decides, oh, we need more subsidies? We're not there by 2030. 53 cents per kilowatt hour usage. How many people in this county, in this nation, are going to be able to pay 53 cents per kilowatt hour? It's all common sense, folks. Be condescending, but if you don't start listening to the people, the people are gonna start reacting back. Recalls are easy.
Mike Coyne, Fairfield Township. Mrs. Ott, you sat up there and continually looked at those ordinance recommendations from the townships. You failed in almost every case to even mention your own township. You had it there, I had to keep yelling out because I knew you were neglecting. You catered to wind energy. Every time you had some feedback that you wanted, it was corporate dollar, not the people. The people are the ones you should be paying attention to. You've heard it here tonight, not the corporate dollar. You sit there smiling, and I said tonight, right here, right now, and it's been a big failure. But I would say that the purpose of tonight, I thought, was to take into consideration what townships had to say in relation to what was presented by Mr. Preston before. I didn't really see much coming out of the panel here talking about what the townships really had to say. A couple references here and there. You said Fairfield Township, well, they have the actual ordinance, and they went through and they commented. It was too complicated for you to go through. With your organizational skills as a teacher, I think you could have put that in a matrix to where you could easily convey what the township said. But you failed to do that. Tonight, you guys did not really have the information available to you to have a good conversation on the townships and their input, and you just kept going back to the wind energy companies for feedback. So, very disappointed. We'll have to see from there, but I hope the Board of Commissioners sees that tonight was a failure on your behalf and that they vote this down.
Mr. Coyne, I do feel a need to reiterate, every person on this planning commission was provided this packet of input from the township. I didn't have to bring it here tonight, and I didn't have to remind our planning commissioners what it stated. Everyone has read it, and it's there. For the sake of being brief and in brevity, I tried to remind the planning commissioners what was available and in front of us in a fair and accurate way. With my, excuse me?
It wasn't fair at all.
In a fair and accurate way based on the 5.5 hours of review that I did last night by sticky noting and highlighting. Again, I didn't have to bring this, but I did. I'm sorry that you feel that way, but just know that I do my best on this position, and I take it very seriously.
Well, it was a failure tonight, so that's just the hard
I'm sorry you feel that way. Pete, are we set?
I think we have one more.
I've been going to the commissioners' meetings with this windmill stuff since October 13th of 16. We talked, and I don't have the numbers with me, and I wish I did, but a lot of money was bonded out to fight Miss Day Creek. And we're worried about lawsuits. Miss Day Creek, and that issue covers what, a quarter of the township, or the county? This covers the whole county. You know how much more it's gonna be than those bonds that Bart's and them are talking about to fight either us or the wind? And predominantly the wind usually loses, just like Mr. Nolan just stated. Let's think about that money there, because this isn't gonna be over if you guys do the will the people don't want. They're gonna referend this, and then you're gonna be paying for elections and all kinds of stuff. You need to think of that big picture, because if Miss Day Creek is just it's a drop in the bucket compared to what you're gonna spend on this mess.
I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
Oh, we've got a couple more.
All right, 2 more. Yep, go ahead.
Robert Keller, Woodhull Township. I'd like to reinforce the comment that was just made about if you come up with something here that doesn't satisfy and protect your residents, this has happened in other places, and they have recalled people. And the process, we already are all aware of the process to do that. We're aware of all these processes, and I urge you to look out for your people of this county. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tim Regal from Fairfield Township. I want to thank you. Okay, what I saw tonight was a case of democracy in action. Did they get everything they wanted? No. these guys get everything they wanted? No. I thought you did the best you could. Okay, under the circumstances, I see this, it's not a perfect ordinance. It was better. It's, you know, still not where I'd like to see it. Not my problem. I want to thank each and every one of you.
Thank you. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
It's been moved and supported that we adjourn at 9:46.